Hi. Every week I get at least one client that says this is what the regulatory pathway is for our device, but what they think the regulatory pathway is not what I think the regulatory pathway is. Now, I make mistakes, and I'm usually pretty good about admitting when I've made mistakes. But I can say that there are far more people out there that work with us that believe um, if they fight back hard enough and argue with me enough, that they'll change what the regulation is. And it doesn't work that way. If you want to sell a device in the US, you have to fit into the bucket or slot that the FDA said, this is what your device is, and this is how we're going to regulate it. You can't convince a bureaucracy to change. You can create new regulations for new products, new technology, new indications. You can provide clinical data for it, but you can't change a bureaucracy and say, I think you ought to treat us differently because ours is really low risk and we haven't hurt anybody. So just don't regulate us that way. It doesn't work that way. The FDA has certain policies, such as a special 510K. A lot of companies say, well, ours is a special. We only changed one thing. And then when we dig in a little deeper, it's like, well, we changed the hardware and we changed the software and we changed the label. The more things you change, the less likely a special 510K is going to fit. So when you have these questions about the regulatory pathway, we give you advice as a consultant. And you're paying an expert to give you that advice. So it's helpful to listen to that person instead of argue with them about everything. So if you hire a regulatory consultant, you can listen to them, or you can say, I'm not sure I agree. I'd like us to submit something to the FDA and ask. So that would be a pre-submission. You submit a pre-submission meeting request to the FDA and ask them about a strategy. And we're more than happy to take risks and push the envelope a little bit with a pre-sub. But if you push the envelope with a 510K, it usually ends up backfiring on you and causing more delays, and you get to market even later. So if you want to skip the pre-sub process, listen to us. If you don't want to skip the pre-sub process and you want to push the envelope and try to convince the FDA, we can do that in a pre-sub. But we can't skip the pre-sub and push the envelope. We have to follow what the FDA's guidelines are. So I'm going to walk you through how to document what your regulatory pathway is, and it isn't always what you want to hear. But our goal here is to save you time and save you money, not cost you time and cost you money. So consider this in mind. That's our strategy here. We're trying to save you. So number one, in a regulatory pathway, and I'm going to put it down below in the description, I actually have this entire list, and we're going to break it down into the different pieces as I talk about them. We'll have timestamps. But number one, you put down the name of your device. So if you're going to write a regulatory pathway, this is what the device's regulatory pathway is for. So which device is it for? And you probably would have one in each design history file for each project. Number two, what are the previous versions of your device? So this is something that comes into play whenever you're talking about a special 510K, where you don't have a choice, you have to use your own device as a predicate. It also comes into play when you have the product in other markets and you're trying to leverage data from other markets, such as preclinical data, post-market clinical follow-up data, or even to show that it's safe and that hasn't occurred, and convince the FDA we don't need to really worry about that risk because it's never happened. Next, the indications for use. You might have the product already on the market in, let's say, Korea or Japan or China or Australia or Europe. But the indications that you want in the US have to match the predicate device if you're going down a 510K pathway. If you want to go down the de novo pathway, you can create your own indication for use. But if you're going to go down the 510K pathway, you have to show your indications for use are equivalent to the predicate. And that does not mean taking one part from this device and another part from this device and getting the FDA to agree to that plan. You have to come up with one that matches on both sides. So ours says this and theirs says this, and ideally the only thing that's changed is the word that says what our device is. That's it. Number 4, the patient population should be in there. So what is our intended patient population? Who are we treating? Are we treating people with a specific disease, or is this a general indication? That's important because usually specific diseases require clinical data. That's how you get a 510K that requires data. Next, intended users. A lot of companies want to say, oh, this is safe, it's easy to use, we want to sell it over the counter. Well, if you want to have it be an OTC product or over-the-counter use product, then you have to show that it can be used in all the directions can be understood. So you're probably going to have to do a usability study. You're probably also going to have to find another device, at least as a reference device, if not a predicate, that is also over the counter. If you can't find that, that's going to be a problem. And you may have to do a pre-sub. Once again, we can't just go ahead for the OTC only and not follow the regulatory consultant's advice. If you do that, you're going to lose time. They're going to put your submission on hold. You're going to have a submission in review meeting. You're going to have to work it out with the FDA and then make the changes they're asking for. And you might have to do a very expensive usability study. So listen to the consultant that's giving you advice on what you need to do for an OTC product. Next, the intended use environment. Is it going to be used in the home, a nursing home, in a pathology lab, in an OR suite? Where is it going to be used? That matters. It determines what kind of testing you need to do, different electrical safety standards apply, and the interoperability matters as well. Next on the list, the classification of the device. By class, I don't mean the product code because we're going to cover that next. Classification is class 1, class 2, class 3. There are no class 3 510Ks anymore. They're all PMAs. Every single class 3 is a PMA. When you get a rejection letter that says it's an automatic class 3 designation, they're saying we can't fit it into a 510K, so we automatically put it into this category, but it could be a de novo. That doesn't mean it's determined yet that this is class 3. That's the word automatic in there. Next item on the list, the product code. So to find the product code for your device, there is the way you normally do it, which is you go into the FDA database for product classification, and you either use their quick search or you use their advanced search. And learning how to maximize the search potential of that database requires practice in really knowing what it can do and it can't do. The other way to do it is you purchase a software tool, like our company licenses a software tool called Basal Systems. That software, it'll actually allow you to do more natural language algorithm searches, just like you would do on Google. And it's much more effective at searching the entire FDA database to find the product code that fits best for you. So that's a more efficient tool, and that's why we use it, and we use it every single day. We can find a predicate and find the product code much, much faster. In the article that I'm going to be posting next week, I'm actually going to show the two side by side. Here's what the results I get when I search on the FDA database and how hard it is for me to find what I'm looking for. And here's the same exact search on the Basal system to show you how much more effective that can be. So if you're struggling to find a predicate and you're struggling to find the right product classification, we can be more confident because we've got those tools in our experience. But you still, if you're not sure and you want to push the envelope and you think it's some other product classification, I know everybody wants their device to be a class 1 that's exempt. In order to get confirmation on that, your two choices are, 1, do a pre-sub and propose it to the FDA and see if they agree, or option 2, submit a 513G. 513G oftentimes doesn't get you the answer you want. It's also costs money and takes time. Next, the regulation. So when you know the 3-letter product code, also you get the regulation with that. In the product classification database, it'll give you both pieces of information. The next one, what is the predicate? Now, once you know the 3-letter product code, you get a list of predicates. In general, you want to focus on the indication for use first, and you want to have something that's recent. So generally, if the client likes the indication for use that is the most recent 510K, we recommend that. There may be technological differences, but usually that doesn't prevent the company from getting the 510K. Usually it's differences in indication for use, or it's a really old 510K and we didn't do the right testing because they didn't have to do the same testing as what's required today. So whenever you can, pick the most recent 510K in that 3-letter product code and try to pick one that has the right indications that you want. Don't try to change the indication for use. That's a much harder battle to fight. But if you're going to pick something that is an older predicate, it should be because there isn't one that there should be a very specific reason. Our device doesn't do this. All these other predicates do that. So therefore, we can't pick those. We need a different one. And this old predicate would be suitable. And I've had that happen for a couple of clients. And so in a pre-sub meeting, once again, we ask the FDA, is this an acceptable predicate? Even though it's really old, it's still being sold on the market, it's safe. Would that be okay? And usually they say yes. The more similar it is to that other device, the better off you are. So if it's an old device, it's still safe and it's still sold on the market, you're probably going to get a yes out of the FDA. So that's definitely an option. It doesn't have to be no less than 10 years old. It's just that's their preference. They don't want a really old predicate using old technology if they can help it. But if there's no harm, then they'll get behind it. Next, the submission type. So this one, we get the most pushback of all. Everybody that has a device already on the market, an old version. So back in 2007, I submitted a 510K. Well, that's great that you submitted it in 2007. I submitted my first 510K in 2005, and I can tell you without a doubt, it seemed a lot like a rubber stamp process back then. The regulatory diligence that was being done by the FDA was not anywhere near where it is today. It's so much more rigorous. In 2012, the process changed radically when they implemented the RTA screening process. Refusal to accept is what RTA stands for. Now they have the E-STAR process. Now they have tons more guidance documents. All the recognized standards have changed since then. I don't know of a single one, a single international standard that the FDA recognizes that's still valid since then. I mean, maybe there's a 1995 catheter one for a pull test, but that's about it. And even that's being replaced. So you really got to think about, what happened in 2007? Does it have any relevance to what we're doing today? Probably not. If the indications are the same, we might still be able to use that predicate, but you have to do all the testing to the current version. If you are updating your model, all your electrical components are end of life, you had to replace them, you did a bunch of letters to file, you have to do all the new testing just because you did a letter to file before, it means now that you're doing a submission, you're going to have to do testing to the new standards. You're going to have to meet all the current requirements, not the 2007 requirements. So just because you didn't have to do it before doesn't mean you don't have to do it now. It's required. You're going to have to follow the current guidance. Maybe the guidance that existed back then, if there was one, is completely different now. There are all kinds of other supporting things like electrical safety, EMC testing, biocompatibility. They've all changed. You're going to have to update to the most current version. So that means more testing. You don't like the answer, but you're hiring a regulatory consultant that's an expert for advice. So listen to them. If you don't like it and you want to push back, pre-sub. That's what you do. Next, the abbreviated 510K. A lot of companies want to use an abbreviated 510K. Oh, we'll just, we'll have a summary of everything. Abbreviated 510K is only allowed under 3 circumstances. Option number 1, they have a special controls guidance document that says, please submit an abbreviated 510K. You followed the guidance. Good job. Option number 2, there is an international technical documentation standard that tells you how to build the summary technical document for that type of device. There aren't many of these, but there are a few. If there is one, you can reference that. Just because there is an international standard for biocompatibility and electrical safety does not mean you can do an abbreviated 510K. That only covers that test, not the whole entire device. You need an international standard for the whole device, for the technical documentation of it. There aren't many of those, so you probably aren't going to be able to use that route. The third thing is look on the FDA database. You log into the 510K database and you search under your three-letter product code and see what and select the button for submission type and change it to abbreviated and see if there are any. If you get no search results, that's your answer. No, you can't do it. So, for those companies that want to do special 510Ks, you have to make sure that you're using your own device as the predicate. You have to have 3 or less functional areas being changed. If I change my hardware, if I change my software, if I change my label, and I change my materials, so that's biocompatibility, I'm changing more than 3 areas and it's not going to be allowed. So a full reboot of your device is not minor changes. And even if you can say, well, it still equals 3, the FDA can still say it could be 2, only 2 changes. But if the FDA says it's going to take us more than 30 days to review all that data that you did to validate those changes, they can say convert it into a traditional because we can't review this in 30 days. They have the last say so. It's not a policy issue, it's an FDA, do we have enough time issue? So if they don't have enough time to review it in 30 days, they're going to force you to change it to a traditional and you don't have a recourse. So listen to your consultant when they say you're not going to be able to go this route. If you think it's going to save you time, you're wrong. What's going to happen is you'll get either held up at the probably at the RTA screening within 15 days, and you'll get a letter back saying, hey, your submission has to be converted to a traditional submission. You'll have to convert it. That'll take you another 2 weeks of work. And now you've wasted a month. Now you resubmit it. And so now it took whatever the normal time would be for a traditional 510K, let's say it's 120 days or 150 days or 180 days, and you're added a month to it. So you're a month slower than it would have been if you had listened. And you were hoping to have the whole process done in a month. So listen or do a pre-sub early. And then a traditional submission would be all the rest. So if it doesn't meet their criteria for a special and it doesn't meet the criteria for an abbreviated, it doesn't fit one of those 3 buckets that I said, then you are a traditional. 90% of the submissions are 510K traditional type submissions. So it's not unusual. There are only a few that are the other. And for those of you that still want to argue on that abbreviated point, look at the timeline on average that it takes for your 3-letter product code to get an abbreviated. You will find statistically there's no difference between the traditional and the abbreviated. They say they're abbreviating their review, but I haven't seen any evidence of it. There's definitely an overlap between those 2 timelines, and it's about 80% overlap. So you might find the shortest day of our abbreviated is shorter than the shortest day for a traditional, but you might not. So go listen to your consultant. When you want to create a regulatory pathway, listen to them. Next item, special controls. You have to make sure there's a special controls document for your device. If there's not, then there's less that you're going to have to provide in your submission. But if you miss it and you say, no, there's not, and the FDA says, no, there is one, you just didn't find it, now you're going to have to go back and change your entire submission in the technical review failure that you have, and you're going to have to fix all those places where you were supposed to say yes to there is a special controls guidance and provide that additional detail. One of the places will be in the labeling. One of the places will be in your device description. Another place will be in your testing, your substantial equivalence. So you need to make sure that's updated. Next, is there an international technical file standard? That could be important and could give you some guidance as to what testing is required, what risk should be included in your risk management file, things like that. Next, applicable recognized standards. They will list some under every 3-letter product code. When you go in the consensus standards database, you can actually type in the 3-letter product code and it will give you a list. It's not all of them, but it gives you the most important ones. You can also look at what the predicate has for 3-letter product codes. That will help you as well. Next, testing requirements. You're going to come up with a list of testing requirements. Most of them are going to be the at least the important ones will be the applicable recognized standards, but you're going to have more general ones like biocompatibility, electrical safety, EMC testing, wireless, if you have RF wireless functions, all those are going to apply. And then you're going to have a timeline at the end. So how long is this process going to take? So if you're creating a regulatory pathway analysis at the beginning of a project, like you should, to go into your design plan for the design history file for before your management approves it, that's when you say we need to do a pre-sub to verify these things with the FDA. So if there's any doubt, make sure you get the pre-sub in your plan in your timeline. That's very important. And if you get a clinical study or any long testing, that should also be in there during the verification validation phase. So I think that covers everything that I would put in a regulatory pathway. As I said, below in the device description, we have a list. I'll put some timestamps in there for the different stages. Some of them are very short because we covered them in just a couple sentences. Others, like the 510K type, whether it's a special, an abbreviated, or traditional, that took a little longer. But I'm going to put the timestamps below, and I hope that helps you. If you have any other further questions about doing a regulatory pathway analysis, look at the blog that we're going to do next Tuesday. I'll put the hyperlink. It's going to point you initially to the old version that I wrote back like in 2016, but we'll have a new updated version next week. Thank you much. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope this is helpful. Please share it with others if you think it will help them. Bye-bye.